very nicely packaged, all of this. How easy is it to get in? Oh, I can get in, that's good, isn't it? And that's a picture of a Rock Pi 4, and here is the actual board itself. I'm impressed with all this attention to detail so far. So let's take the board and put it down there, and we can have maybe a closer look. And straight away we see this is a board with a Raspberry Pi form factor, all of these components in very familiar places as they would be on a Raspberry Pi. But I think to review this board, the first thing to do is to turn it over, because so many of the exciting features are on the underside of the board. And the first thing we see here is the system on a chip, which is a Rockchip RK3399. And this contains a 64-bit hexa-core CPU with 2 ARM Cortex-A72 cores running at 1.8 GHz and 4 ARM Cortex-A53 cores running at 1.4 GHz. And then there's also an ARM Mali T860MP4 GPU. And then next to the system on a chip, we've got 2 chips here. These contain the memory. This is DDR4 RAM, which on this particular model of Rock Pi 4B is 4 GB of DDR4 RAM. Now, if we look at the end of the underside of the board, things change from exciting to very exciting. We've got quite a few features here we wouldn't maybe expect to see on a Pi-sized single-board computer. For a start, we've got a real-time clock battery connector, and then down here we've got a micro SD card slot. Okay, you'd probably expect to see a micro SD card slot, and this will take cards up to 128 GB. And then next to that, we can connect to this board an eMMC flash module, which can also be up to 128 GB. And then in the middle of all these things, the very exciting thing is the M.2 slot. And this is for an NVMe SSD up to 2 TB. And if I bring in an NVMe SSD, here's a WD Black model, you'll see that the connector on the Rock Pi 4B actually points out this way. So our driver would have to turn round and plug in from this end, which would work like that. But it's not ideal, as it's pointing out the end of the board. But do not fear, there is a solution to this, which we'll see a bit later in the video. Anyway, for now, let's flip back to the top of the board. And here you can see down here we've got the wireless chip. This gives you a Wi-Fi 802.11 AC and Bluetooth 5.0. And over here we have got a 4-pin connector, which can enable you to add a little hat and add on board for power over Ethernet. Although do note it can't take the same board as a Raspberry Pi. We've also got the MIPI connectors here and here, CSI and DSI connectors, a camera connector and display connector, and these will work with a Raspberry Pi camera and display. And then finally on the top of the board, you can't have missed it, 40-pin GPIO connector compatible with the Pi and also color coding. If we look to the long edge of the board, we can see here we've got a power connector in the place we'd expect to see one on say, a Raspberry Pi, but this is not a micro USB power, this is USB-C power. And then along from that, we've got an HDMI socket. This is HDMI 2.0, supporting up to 4K at 60 frames per second. And then next to that, a 3.5mm audio jack. Finally, on the main short edge of the board, we find gigabit Ethernet, which does have that power over Ethernet support if an appropriate header board is fitted to this board. And then we've got 4 USB ports, which, as you can see from the colours, 2 of these are USB 2, but 2 are USB 3. And the top USB 3 can be OTG. And to actually switch between different types of mode for that socket, it's really cool, because if we flick the board over, you will see there's a tiny little switch up here. If I go into a very, very large close-up, you'll see this is a switch which allows us to switch between host and device for that top USB 3 port. And so there we are, the Rock Pi 4B, a very well specified single board computer.